Okay. So, hi
We're live.
everyone. We're so glad to have Daniel Grayson, former admission officer from Tufts University, here with us again today on an interesting topic, which is the
Well,
application essay.
formerly Tufts.
Yeah,
Formerly
former,
Tufts.
former. So, it's deemed that the essay is one of the elements that would give your application the third dimension. So, Dan, as a former admission officer, what do you think is the role of the application essay?
Um, huh. The well, the role of the application essay is to be able to talk about things that you can't learn about from looking at grades and test scores. One of the most important parts of the admissions process for the United States, uh, the core philosophy is the belief that there is more to what makes someone an effective student and an effective learner and an effective teacher than whether or not they can get good grades in classes. And one of the core components of that is kind of the belief that um, that grades tell you a lot of valuable things, but they don't tell you about what a person values or the kinds of ideas they're drawn to, or if they're creative or logical, or if they're an optimist or a pessimist, and that those kinds of things are important when you're constructing a group of people who have to learn from each other. When you're putting together a class, you want people who are different from each other because you create better and more powerful learning opportunities. And so the
Mm,
role that the essay plays in the application process is it's supposed to be the primary vehicle, the primary method for evaluating that they can fill the class with people who are just more than who are more than warm bodies. One of the things I always thought was really interesting while I was at Tufts was when we would meet with faculty members, when the admissions officers would get together with faculty and with professors, and somebody would always ask, what kinds of students do you want us to find? Who do you want us to look for when we're reading an application? You know, whatever department this professor was from, art history, psychology, physics, mechanical engineering, English, whatever. When they find for your field, the professors would never say, find me more students who get A's. They wouldn't say, like, I want students who are going to get better than a 92% on my exams. They would say, find me the ones who stay after class and who ask interesting questions and who have things to say. Find me students who can argue with me, who can voice their opinions. Find me students who are going to push me. And that's, I think, a really separate set of things than finding out who gets an A or whatever. You can look at a Vietnamese transcript and you can see that somebody has an 8.6 or a 9.1, and that can tell you a lot about how hard a person is going to work, but it does tell you about the kinds of things that professors were asking us to find in their students.
okay. So I think let's start with a Q&A because there are many questions about application essays. And
Fantastic.
okay, so the most asked question is that where does the inspiration to write an essay come from? What should I do when starting to write, and what questions to ask myself to find ideas for the essay? And how do I choose the right things related to myself?
That's such a hard question.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that I think is really tricky about the core of the question, which is, how do I find the right thing to talk about, is so there's a Chinese proverb, which I'm going to poorly translate into English, and for all I know, there's a Vietnamese equivalent. But and the proverb is basically, it's hard to see the mountain when you're standing on the mountain. That when you're far from something, you can see the whole of it, and when you're on it, you can't. And I think that's the challenge for each of us. If we sit down and have to write an essay, the admissions officers like to say, "Tell us who you are," and and it's hard to say who you are because you spend all your time being you. And so when you're looking for inspiration for things to talk about for yourself, it can sometimes be really hard to see what the right ideas are because you're so close to yourself all the time that you don't see yourself clearly. So what I would suggest is that somebody looks for the things that make that person distinctive. You don't have to be unique, but you do your peers, you want to be distinctive from your friends and from other people applying from the same culture or the same country or the same school. Uh, and to do that, I think it's important to ask yourself, what are the moments when I feel like I'm different? The moments where you wonder, am I the normal person and everyone else is weird, or am I the weird one and everyone else is normal? So, what are the moments when you're walking around and you see an advertisement, a poster on the street, and that poster portrays gender norms in a way that makes you really mad, and none of your friends seem to understand why you're so angry, that's an effective essay topic. You're in a physics class, and your physics teacher is talking about space elevators or advancements in nanoparticles or something, and you are really excited about it, and the rest of the room looks completely bored. That's an effective essay topic. You're posting something on Facebook expecting a long conversation about politics or lifestyles or economics or whatever, and nobody hits the like button because you're the only one who cares. That's an essay topic. What are the things in the world where you're excited and everybody else seems to think it's boring? Or the issues that you really want to talk about that your friends don't want to talk about? And if you have trouble seeing those things for yourself because I think it's time to start asking your friends and your family and your teachers, if you have a relationship with them, what are the moments when I do things you can't do? What are the moments when I say things you wouldn't notice? What are the times where I'm talking about something and you can't even understand what I'm saying? And if your friends can't think of things off the top of their head, if they sit there and you ask that question and they go, I don't know, I can't remember anything, then say the next time that happens, I need you to point it out to me so that I know when it was. And a lot of those, I think, can make for very effective essays.
Okay. So, should an applicant mention controversial topics like religion in her essay?
They certainly can. I don't think you have to go out of your way to mention religion or politics or things that are controversial. And I know that and controversial is also relative, right? There are things you can say in Vietnam that are extremely controversial and in some cases illegal that you can talk about in the United States and no one will find controversial, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a local context that also comes into play here. But I think if it's something that a student feels really actual sense of self, and that's really important, right? It's not just what you want to talk about or what's emotionally important, it's also what's intellectually important. And if there's a topic that's intellectually important to a student and they want to talk about it, I don't think there's anything that's really off limits.
Okay. So, the next question is, does an essay always have to go through a climax to show personal growth, or is it okay just to bend the essay whichever way you want, as long as it tells my compelling story about myself?
Yeah. Climax, I don't think it needs a point. I don't think it needs a conclusion. Sometimes an essay needs that, like a particular essay.
Yeah.
I don't think every essay does. But students have, when they go in, like they've got to summarize, like they've got to reach they've got to reach the point, right? Rises up, and then they have to kind of bring it down and say, and that's how you know that I'm blank, right? Or this is how I learned that it's important to help people, or this is how I learned that even poor people can be happy people, right? Or whatever the moral is. And I think a lot of essays don't need that. In many essays, final paragraph and the end sentence and works, and often it's enough just to watch someone struggle with an idea. If there's a essays about, kind of, again, going back to the point about controversial topics, like I was just reading one that a student wrote about whether or not religion has a place in politics, and the end of the essay was, I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I feel like religion is a really important part of who I am, and so how can I separate that from politics? But I also know that I shouldn't be trying to impose my religion on other people, and I don't know where the balance is between those two things, right? And I think that that's fine to end an essay with, I don't know, because sometimes these are really difficult questions and really difficult ideas that you're wrestling with in an essay, and it's inauthentic, it's false, if you get to the end of it and say that you have an answer to a question that people have been wrestling with for 1,000 years.
Okay, so here's another question about a dilemma I think that many people have between an essay about academic achievement and an essay about hidden talent. Which one do you think more interesting?
Your essays don't have to be about academic achievement, and they don't have to be about talents. They can just be about the interesting in the world. I mean, the answer to the question, which should you write about? Should I write about academic achievement or should I write about hidden talent? I think the answer to that is, what are you more excited to talk about? And which thing better reflects your intellectual sense of self? Like, you're not writing just to write. You're not, I mean, from Vietnam it's a little different. You do need to demonstrate your capacity to write in English. But separate from that is, can you give someone an understanding of who you are and how you like to think? I think sometimes you can write about academic achievement in a way that does that, and sometimes you can't. You know, if you're talking about a math competition that you studied really hard for, and you're writing an essay about how hard you studied for that math competition, that's not an effective essay, because I already know how hard you study. I see that in your Vietnamese grades. Like, to get good grades in the Vietnamese system, you have to study really hard. And so that's one where you could write an essay about academic achievement that's a total waste of time. But you could also write the same thing about a hidden talent. You could write the same essay about juggling. You could say, nobody knows that I know how to juggle, but I juggle all the time, and I practice for hours every day, and now I'm a master juggler because I spent so much time practicing and I work so hard at it. And that essay makes the same mistake that the essay makes about academic achievement. So I think the most important thing is that you're really excited to share something and that it reflects who you are.
Okay, so this brings me to another question. So, is it a good idea to squeeze many interesting stuff around oneself into the essay, or is it better to focus on just one thing?
It's almost always better to focus than it is to spread. So the common refrain you'll hear from admissions officers in the United States is, it's better to be narrow and deep than it is to be shallow and wide, right? Better than squeezing 7 different themes into an essay is to find one theme and stick to it. But finding one idea and sticking to it doesn't mean that your essay is, or that it's monotone, right? You can find lots of different ways to weave different ideas around the same core concept, right? So there's a student that I know from Singapore who's writing an essay on how she believes that rules are meant to be broken because she wants to forge her own path in spite of growing up in an educational system that's constantly telling her what she's supposed to do. So she's got one theme, right, of I want to forge my own path, but woven into that are a couple different kinds of ideas of where she does that. You know, one is artistic space, where she deviates from what her teachers tell us the purpose of art is. Another is family space, where she deviates from her parents' conception of what the role of a woman in society is. And so each of these things are kind of structured around the central theme. But that's in a 600-word essay. If you're writing a 250-word essay or a 150-word supplemental essay, you don't really have space even to do that. You've got to kind of hit someone over the head a little bit more bluntly with what your idea is, which usually requires depth over going wide.
Okay. So, what are the themes that you write in the essay throughout your whole year of being an admission officer?
Can you ask again? Sorry.
Okay. What are the common themes that students often write about in the essay that you get from your experience from reading all the application essays?
Well, I'll talk about a couple of themes in particular that I see students do that don't work well. Because I think it's easier to do that than it is to say, here are themes that admissions officers see a lot. Because you can write on these themes and do it quite well. And I do want to be clear about that. So I'm going to describe a couple of essay topics that we see a lot of in admissions that don't usually work. But that's not to say they can't work. You can write a good essay on these topics. You just don't want to make the same mistakes that everyone else makes. The first is the essay about hard work, which is sometimes about athletics, or it's about music, or it's about school, or it's about losing weight, or it's about a variety of different topics. And you see a lot of these in Asia because for lots of different reasons, but the biggest one is I think the educational systems in Asia are quicker to tell you what you're doing wrong than they are to tell you what you're doing right. So, and so you see a lot of those, like, I did this and I wasn't very good at it, but then I worked really hard at it, and even though I might not be naturally talented, I'm now successful. Or there's a particular piece that I wanted to play on the violin or on the piano, and it was very, very difficult to play, and I practiced and I practiced and I practiced, and on the day of the recital, I got it correctly. Or you'll see this in the Common App essay, the one that says write about failure and why. You'll see a student say, well, I failed at this, I didn't get it right in the recital, but I worked really hard at it, and working hard was its own reward. And the challenge with an essay about hard work is that it's not the right message. Admissions officers know how hard you work because they have your grades and they have your test scores, and to do well as a Vietnamese student on either of those things requires dedication and hard work. The other reason that that's kind of the wrong essay topic to write, an essay that talks about how hard you work, is because the truth is that you are not defined by hard work as a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old. It is you who are defining the work, not the work that is defining you. Right? There's something about you that makes you work hard, and that's the part you want to be talking about, not the hard work itself. And that's a much more difficult question to get at, right? Like, who am I that makes me want to spend that much time learning to play this piece on the piano, or makes me spend this much time preparing for the speech competition, or makes me spend all this time learning this physics concept that was difficult for me in the first place, right? Like, there's a piece of you that pushes you in those directions, and that's the part you should talk about, not working hard. And the second essay where I think students stumble a lot on are essays about service. I have a friend whose younger brother was writing his college essays, and he asked me to look at them. And he wrote a very, very nice essay about helping this old man. And this old man, you know, over the summer, his family left to go on vacation, and it was Simon's job to help this old man named, I think it was Lewis, I don't remember, over the course of the summer. And I read the essay, and it was a finely written essay. It was, you know, good English, right? I helped this old man. I wasn't really excited about it, but over the course of the summer, I grew to see value in what I was doing, and I'm glad I got to help this guy, and now I understand the virtues of helping people, and I look forward to going to college where I can continue to make the world a better place, or whatever. And it's a finely written essay, but it also didn't say that much about Simon because there's no essay on the other side of that, right? There's no essay that somebody writes about service where they finish it and they go, man, it was terrible. I never want to help someone ever again. I just, like, helping people was the worst. I don't want to do it. I'm never doing it again. If you admit me, I'm going to spend all my time tearing other people down. I will never help anyone. There's no opposite to that. And it's also clear that like this old man, like, isn't that important, you know? Like, when I asked Simon, like, is Lewis one of your favorite 10 people on planet Earth? Simon didn't say yes. When I asked Simon, is Lewis one of your favorite 50 people on the planet Earth? Simon didn't say yes. I said, you know, is helping the elderly something you want to do with your time? Is it something you want to learn more about in college? And Simon was like, I don't really think so. And I was like, do you want to work in a career where the elderly are really important to your life? And Simon was like, definitely not. I do not want to work with old people. You know, and I was like, well, if you don't care that much about the issues facing the elderly, and if Lewis isn't someone who you really value, why are you talking about him in the only space these schools are giving you to talk about yourself? And you know, and Simon said, well, I want schools to know I'm nice, and that's valuable and it's important, but you've got to be talking about things you love more. And I think when students write essays about service, they're talking usually more about things they think admissions officers want to hear than they are about the things in the world they're genuinely excited by. And there are definitely exceptions to this. You know, I read an essay last year that a girl wrote about working with women's collectives in rural Vietnam, trying to find ways to help women have more economically sustainable lifestyles. And she was able to write this in a way that was really powerful and really moving. But I also know that she was the kind of student who woke up in the morning thinking about the economic welfare of these women, and who went to sleep at night thinking, how do I best generate opportunities for these women who have no opportunities, right? Like, she was thinking about these issues all the time, and the extent of her thinking came out in her essay. So if you're the kind of person that's thinking about how do I make irrigation systems work better for farmers, or how do I communicate the needs of this group of people to others, or how do I better involve myself in how people's lives can improve. You know, if you genuinely spend all of your time thinking about those things, or a lot of your time thinking about those things, write the essay, because it will help you. But if that's not you, it's okay, and you can skip it as a topic.
Okay. So what are the ways to carry out an essay for, like, a change in the writer's self, like a change in the perspective of seeing an event, or starting with a small anecdote, then enlarging to a reflection on life? Is it okay if, like, what are the ways to carry out an essay, like, apart from the two ways that you mentioned above?
Well, there's no. It's easier to talk about things you shouldn't do than it is to talk about things you should do because there's no rule on what your essay should be. You can tell a story in your essay. You can talk about an idea in your essay. You can chronicle events. You can describe your background. I mean, there's really kind of nothing that's off limits in terms of style or content. So you know, but I think the question about like how do I carry out an essay when I'm writing about a change in myself after an event is a good question. I think the trick to doing that is to focus not on who you were before the event, but who you are now in the wake of it. A lot of essays will spend like 50-50. Half of it will be before the event, or let's say 30% will be before the event, 30% will be the event, 30% will be after the event, and 10% of conclusion. And I think that an essay that's talking about kind of change should focus on who you are now after the change or who you see yourself becoming because of that change than it should where you were before. And I would say similar things about the influences of family members or the influences of activities. You want to focus more on who you are in this moment, like what do you see in your life now, than you do what you did before. So like I'll use myself as an example here. Before I started traveling overseas, I didn't appreciate how much of the U.S. media was focused on stories that happen inside the United States and how little the rest of the world is talked about inside the United States. Like I just didn't know those things before I started traveling. So if I were going to write an essay about how traveling over, I'd do that by talking about the issues in the world I care about now after having traveled, not by talking about the issues in the world I didn't care about before I traveled. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what are the common errors that I should watch out when writing my essay?
Yeah, common errors. I mean, beyond error in topic, like the things I was talking about. Don't write about just how hard you work. Don't write about things you don't care about. But the other common errors that I think people make a lot is they spend too much time setting up the scene. It's even in a 600-word essay, you just don't have that much space in a 600-word essay. Words, kind of framing your topic before you get into it. You don't want a third of your background someone needs to understand what you're saying. And if you do background, you should find a different topic. Also, hackers who are reading these essays are reading a lot of essays and spending a lot of time doing it. And you want to get to the most important ideas really fast. And sometimes that's a big mistake too. Students will leave the most important, most interesting ideas for the end. Like they'll build up to them. And that can be effective, but you also can get to the really big ideas, the important ideas first, early. And in doing that, you can get someone to thinking about what you want them to be thinking about sooner, rather than making them wait through 400 words to get to your point. The other thing that I think students sometimes don't do so well in the course of writing their essays is they focus too much on the story they want to tell. They come up with the topic first and then the idea second. So they'll say, here's the story I want to tell about myself, and then they'll say, now what is someone supposed to learn about me from hearing this story? I think it's better to think someone to understand about me that lets me tell that story. And sometimes those can be very small things. I think sometimes the best essays can be written about really small ideas rather than really. Favorite essay ever is an essay that a girl wrote, this is an American from Kentucky, about the differences between mechanical pencils and regular pencils. And so she was writing that using a mechanical pencil, she says, is like bringing a laser gun into a sword fight, like the click pencils.
Yeah.
You will win, but you will do so without grace and without elegance. Like there's something about a regular pencil that has history and that feels good emotionally in a way a mechanical pencil does not. And that's what her whole essay was about, like kind of the difference between how you experience the efficiency of something versus how you experience the emotion of something, which is the same thing that makes my iPhone.
Yeah.
Technology. And that's what girl talking about it in the differences she saw between pencils. And I think often students will make a mistake where they'll write about something that's like too big and then they can't get themselves or their perspective into this really big thing they're talking about. It's big, I like doing that.
Hello? 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 Are you still there? Okay, so I think there's a connection break here, so you guys can be patient for 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. Mm. Danielle? Danielle? Hello? Okay, good. Hey, Dan. Okay, are you on? Okay, okay. Can hear you. Can. Okay. So continue.
Oh, I'm back.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, what about the essay word choice? What should be appropriate for the essay?
What should you? Sorry, what was the question?
How should an essay word choice be like? Is it maybe formal or informal or anything?
Oh, informal. Always informal. There's almost never an instance where an essay should be written in a really formal voice. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest mistake I see. Well, maybe not the biggest. One of the very large mistakes these applicants. Okay, so although this is much less common in Vietnam than it is in other countries, is students will write with a level of formality and a vocabulary that they think is supposed to fit that level of formality, but actually just exposes weaknesses in English. A student should never use words they are not comfortable using in the course of their essay, because you will use them incorrectly. So it's okay if you use kind of the regular language you would use if you were writing an email to somebody you knew overseas. You know, you want your grammar to be polished, right? And you want proper English usage. But in terms of vocabulary and in terms of style, like you can write informally. You don't need to use the words that the College Board is testing on the SATs. It's weird and unnecessary. Like, you shouldn't say utilize instead of use. Like, it's weird and unnecessary, and you would never say utilize in real life. If it's a word you wouldn't say speaking to somebody, it's a word you don't need to use in an admissions essay.
Okay. So I've read many supplementary essays that are very odd, such as like Tufts essay have. Uh, what should the applicants go about doing this essay? Like, does the essay idea have to be very original or different to impress the admission officer?
I don't think an essay should, like, original and unique are words that I hate hearing when applied to essays, because if you're applying to a school like Tufts where they're going to read 40,000 supplemental essays, like, original isn't in, you know, like,
True.
and especially if this is somebody, I mean, I read, in the 8 years I was at Tufts, I probably read, just me alone, you know, somewhere close to 30,000 supplemental essays. Like, you're not really going to be able to write something that the AOs haven't read before. So that's not the goal, and it doesn't have to be the goal. But you do want to be distinctive. And this is true even for the essay topics that are not odd, where they're asking really boring questions. Like, you do have to find a way to distinctive to yourself and to write about things that are specific to you and the way that you see the world. I think writing in ways that are specific to you is different from being unique or original. But I think if you're doing it well, you are talking about things that are distinctive. A sign that things might be going well is if you have to struggle to find the idea you want to write about, and then once you stumble onto the idea, you find it's really easy to write. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you write in that first draft is actually good. There's an author I really like, and she says that the key to good writing is to be comfortable with a shitty first draft. Like, a shitty first draft can become really good writing. So you don't need your first draft to be good, but it should feel like you have a lot to say. Like, it's like easy to fill the space, and that if you come across the right idea, it just kind of flows out of you, even if you have to come back and edit it several times and take things out or add new things in. And so that I think is true for everyone's supplements. I think some schools are better at asking good supplemental questions than others. You know, Tufts, Occidental, Chicago, like, they ask really good supplemental questions that have personality and I think make it easier for students to answer, versus you know, the application questions that are on, you know, Dartmouth's application, or the questions that, like, University of Wisconsin is asking, or Penn. Oh my God, Penn's question, which is like 650 words about why you want to go to Penn. I think that's, I mean, I'm sure it's useful. I'm sure they ask it with good reasons. But from a student perspective, it's terrible. But just because the question doesn't seem odd doesn't mean that you don't need to find a distinctive way to answer it. Like, your answer still needs to reflect specific personal things about who you are and how you see things.
Okay. So speaking about essay drafts, like, one student have various essay drafts, and and he likes all of them. And how to pick out the right one and work on it?
What a great problem! I love that. That's a really good problem. What do I do if I like more than one draft? I think you might be the only person in the world that has that particular problem, whoever asked that question. But congratulations. I'm happy for you. Honestly, if you have drafts and you're not sure, find someone who you trust, who doesn't know you, right? This could be like a classmate who you don't talk to very often, or somebody at a different school, or somebody on the VAclub, you know, the VA forums. Or the forums still exist? Do they close the forums? Find someone who you trust and ask them to read. Good. Ask them to read both, and then ask them, which do you feel you learned more about me from reading, in a good way. And then you can do that with a couple of people and kind of go from there. You know, the goal of the essay is to make someone who's never met you before learn something important about you, and then to make them want to meet you. Because that's how you get into these schools. An admissions officer wants to meet you and then admits you, because the only way they get to meet you is if they admit you, and then you come to their school. So, but you can do that. You can give the essay to people who don't know you, and you can ask them, what do you think you learned more about me from reading? But that's the key. It needs to be somebody who doesn't know you.
Okay, so previously you talked about the why essay. So how should you respond to a why essay? What aspect of the school should be mentioned? And if you talk about the obvious thing like good program, prestige, and extracurricular activities, like will it sound good to the application officer?
So you never want to talk about prestige. Never. I mean, you can talk about how good a program is. That's talking about the strength of a program is very different from talking about the prestige of a program. Yeah, and there are lots of prestigious schools. So if you talk about how prestigious a school is, you're not helping them. Again, the question is to be distinct. Be distinct about yourself, but also distinct about the school. So Tufts, where I used to work and where I went to school, which is why I have the shirt. Yeah, go Jumbos. And it's an amazing school. You all should be thinking about applying to Tufts. And I'm not just saying that because I used to be an admissions officer there. I'm also saying it because I have a diploma from there. So Tufts is a school located near Boston, but not in Boston, and is accessible to Boston using the subway. So you can go to downtown Boston from Tufts, even though it's a school in the suburbs. And so people really like Tufts for that reason, right? They don't live in the city, but they want to be able to go to a really big city, and they don't want to have to drive a car. This is especially true for foreign citizens, where like most of you don't have driver's license for cars, and you're not going to bring your motorbikes with you, right? Yeah. And but I never meet with Tufts alums. Like I'm never at an alumni gathering here in Singapore or in Boston or in Washington, D.C. and meet alums who say things like, do you know why I was really proud to go to Tufts? I was proud to go to Tufts because we were located in suburban Boston. Go suburbs. You know, like nobody says that. And so I think the reasons that you might want to go there are different from the reasons that you would be proud to be a student there. And it's the second set of reasons that you want to focus on. Like, why would I be proud to be there? What about the school's personality or student body or program would make me proud to be there? And the other thing that a good why blank essay does is you connect pieces of your identity with pieces of the identity of the school. So, like, where do you see yourself reflected in who the school is? And that is also very different from prestige. This is another reason why I say don't write about prestige. Like, you are not reflected in the prestige of the school unless you are really pretentious or kind of an asshole, you know? So, you know, you want to see, like, am I, like, this is, like, Occidental, I was just on their website, that's why I'm talking about Occidental. You know, Occidental talks about being a place full of restless minds, right? Is there a piece of your identity reflected in Occidental's identity? And can you talk about that? You know, is there a piece of who you believe you are that you see reflected in the physics program at the school? You know, are you someone who likes tangible problems and now you're going to go to school filled with people who like tangible problems? Or are you someone who likes tangible problems who's really excited to go to a school where people don't like to think about tangible problems because that's how you want to think? Of yourself and the pieces of who you want to become that are present in the identity of the school, and what are the pieces of the identity of the school that you see reflected in you? And so it's a question that you can answer with tangible, pragmatic things, but you have to connect the tangible, pragmatic pieces to the philosophical pieces of who you are and who the school is too. And you can do that even in a 100-word why blank answer.
Okay. So contrary to like Tufts University, there are many schools that doesn't have a supplementary essay. So how to know what it expects from its applicant, and how can the applicant prove he's a good fit for the school through just one essay?
So asking how much do I need to tailor my essay to match the culture of the school? And I think if you need to tailor your essay to match the culture of the school, you're applying to the wrong schools. Like, the list of schools that you're applying to should be places that match you, that fit you and your character and the way you want to learn and the way you want to see the world and the way that you want to see yourself. And if you're applying to a school that matches you in that way, you don't need to tailor. Bar will fit the school. Your personal statement will fit the school. And a really important part of your search for where you apply is how do you create a list as you want to apply are places that will like you just for being you. Now, just because they like you doesn't mean they admit you. They can like you and still say no to you, either because too many students they like, but it certainly helps you get in if you're applying to a list of schools that fit. So I don't think you need to worry about whether your personal statement matches the school, because it will match the school if you apply.
Okay. So let's talk about some technical stuff here. So can an applicant send a different personal statement after the early admission process?
Yeah, last year I don't think you could. Last year I think once you submitted your Common App, it was like locked in, and the essay you used was just your essay, and that was the end. I think this year they changed it so that you can submit a Common App and then still go back and make edits to your Common App even after submitting it to a school. So you can do that. You can write a personal statement that if you discover you hate it between applying early and applying regular, I think you can go back and make changes.
So another question, I think it's the last question, that is that I present an extremely unique and unusual, in a good way, personality in the personal statement. Can it compensate for the low standardized scores?
Yes and no. So the reality of applying for financial aid, which is, most of the VA students who are going to watch this, I think are going to be applying for some financial aid. The reality of applying for financial aid is that it's very, very difficult to get in to schools where your standardized test scores are lower than where they want them to be. It's not impossible, but it's just really hard, and to still get funding.
Okay.
If you are applying where your standardized test scores are kind of lower than average or lower than you want, I think the case that you need to make in your essay and in your recommendations too, but the essay is the more important space for that, is you need to be able to demonstrate that your level of thinking is higher than what your test scores or your grades would indicate, right? That you're smarter than your number, that you're more intellectually interesting than your number. And so the question of where your essay does that, I think, is a little different from having a unique or unusual personality. You can have a unique or unusual personality and still be really dumb, right? Like, you can be a really interesting person and still be dumb. And that's not the goal for your essay. The goal for your essay is to show someone that you're interesting and also smart. And so if you think your standardized test scores are low and you want your essay in part to kind of bridge the gap, what you have to demonstrate with your essay is that you're thinking about the world and about ideas at a higher level than what your numbers indicate. And so the goal there should be to talk about something smart, not to talk about something unusual.
Okay. So I think that's the last question for today's session. So do you have any last words for the students who are rushing for the deadline?
Rushing for the deadlines. Don't be afraid to write terrible first drafts. Really, like, a lot of the best essays start with terrible first drafts. If you're 6 edits into an essay and it's not getting any better and you're on like the 7th revision, try starting over. Sometimes taking the idea you have and have been spending a lot of time with and just throwing it out and beginning again means that you come up with something better. So don't be afraid to throw things out and start over if it's not working, or if it's working but not well enough. Don't be afraid to edit the best parts of your essay. Sometimes the most beautiful lines are the ones that have to go to make room for the most beautiful ideas. So don't be afraid to ditch really nice sounding lines if it makes your essay sound better in the end. Sometimes that's important. And make sure you love what you're talking about. If you're bored by your own essay, if you're talking about an idea or a topic that you find boring, the admissions officer who reads it is not going to think it's interesting if you wrote it and you are the author and think it's dull. World that you're really excited about, and the issues in the world that really matter to you, and the parts of your life that you're really proud of or that you really want to share. And make sure that when you finish writing, you're really excited or proud of what you've done. I mean, I think more than anything, that's the important thing. Be proud of your work and be proud of what you've done.
So thank you very much for this sharing sessions, and I hope to see you in many other webinars also.
I can't wait.
Very much. Yeah, thank you very much.
Good luck, Hanoi. Good luck.
Bye-bye.
Bye.